Hello and welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. This week's film to book adaptation is Agatha Raisin and the Quiche of Death. It was written by M.C.Beaton and published in 1992. It was then adapted to screen in 2014. Now, I will be saying film, but obviously the Agatha Raisin series is a TV series. Each episode is either broken down into two, like 45 minutes, or one sort of like 1.5 hour special. So are we looking at three things? How good is the book? How good is the film? And how well does the book take from the film? So first things first, the film. Now, I love the cast, the characters. I love everything about the adaptation. I genuinely remember watching Agatha Raisin for the first time and thoroughly enjoying it. I thought it was just it's almost like a breath of fresh air, because I love Miss Marple and I love Poirot and all of that. But Agatha Raisin, a high-flying PR, moves out to the Cotswolds from London, and basically, because she cheats in a quiche making competition, gets embroiled in a accidental death, which then she's determined to prove is murder, to basically get herself back up and running within the village. And it's just so funny to watch the way the characters interact, the way that you've got Roy, who's her assistant, was sort of like working with her at the PR firm, kind of, still staying in touch with her trying to make friends with the new people in the village, her really annoying her neighbour. Just everything about it is just an absolute joy. I love how it's just perfectly bizarre that she cheats about entering a quiche competition, and because she cheats, that's how she's able to figure out who did it. And I feel like if she hadn't cheated, she probably wouldn't have been able to figure it out. And I love that she cheated to enter a competition on baking quiches where you win a fiver or a tenner or whatever it was. And it's just, and that results in the whole plot. I mean, all the series are on Now TV. Are probably going to be doing a couple more down the road, because M.C.Beaton, as far as I'm aware, has written 32 books so far. I've got the first 7, and so I probably will be doing a couple more of the adaptations, because I think they are really good. Well, I love the show, and so far we'll see how we feel about the book. So I recommend this program to everybody. It gets a 10 out of 10 from me. I love rewatching it. It's just as good the second time round as the first. It's just as good the 7th time round as the first. And you could just keep watching it. So next, the book. Now, this book was delightful. I can't believe it took me so long to read it. So Michael did tell me that the Agatha Raisin show was based on books, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, okay, when they say based on books, it's very loose. But I mean, it took me a while, and I was like, do you know what? I'm going to give these books a go. I'll see what happens. And the first 7 books were on a deal on Amazon, so I bought them. And I loved it. I thoroughly loved it. I really liked Agatha. I honestly felt for her as a main character. I felt that she had despicable parts of her where she was a bit gruff with people, but I could see why she was. Like, she was, at one point she was like, well, Roy's a bit of a bit flamboyant or whatever. But I genuinely felt like she pushed people away because she's used to getting everything that she wants the first time, and she's had to be that person in her life. You get a bit of a backstory as well in the first book, so you learn about her parents basically being alcoholics, and she marries someone quite young and he turns out to be an alcoholic, so she goes off and she makes it on her own. Then she decides to sell up with a retirement and go to the Cotswolds, where it's the only place that she was ever happy, the only ever happy holiday she can remember. I love these styles of whodunits. I love the kind of like that it's not the detective, that it's somebody completely out of the box. It's like Rosemary and Thyme. They're gardeners and they solve murders. I love it. And it felt good and it felt real. And I feel like a couple of the phrases and a couple of the bits here and there probably hasn't stood the test of time. But the majority of it, the characters, the character progression, I'm so excited to see how it goes in the next few books, was really enjoyable, and I thoroughly loved it. So I would honestly recommend this book to anyone. It's such a quick little read. I think it's under 300 pages, and it gets a 9 out of 10 from me. It would get a 10 out of 10, but it is because of a couple of bits here and there that I felt like maybe of its time, but now you have to kind of have a wander. So the plot I will be discussing in its entirety. So please, at this point, turn off the video if you haven't seen it or read it and you want to and you don't want it spoiled. If you don't mind, then continue watching. So in both, it starts with Agatha moving from London to the Cotswolds after early retirement from a PR firm that she's helped create. In the book, she's been there for a while. Then she tries to go back to London. So she's been in the Cotswolds for a while, and she tries to go back to London. She finds everything's changed, and we also get her backstory about her parents and her husband. In the film, she starts meeting people straight away, and most are pretty much sure that they don't like her. And she also gets burgled as well, which doesn't happen in the book. So in both, she thinks about entering a quiche competition to try and fit in better with the village and to get people to like her, and also her neighbour, and also ask her neighbour for a cleaning lady. And Sheila, her neighbour, is just so rude to her and just hates her guts. So she finds the details of the cleaning lady and steals her completely away from Sheila. Now, in the book, the cleaner is called Doris. She's an older lady who is married, but in the film, she's called Gemma, who is younger with a daughter. But in both, she strikes up a friendship, and in both, she tempts Mrs. Simpson, as it were, Doris or Gemma, away from Sheila and becomes friends with them. Now, in both as well, Agatha approaches Mr. and Mrs. Cummings Brown about the quiche competition to try and get an upper hand in the competition. And at this point in the film, we know that Mr. Cummings Brown is a bit of a dog, and he has several women on the go. Yes, not one, not two, but several. And we don't really, we kind of learn that out in the book, but it's hidden here and there throughout there. So so in both, Agatha buys her quiche. In the book, it's straight away. In the film, we find out after the death has occurred that the quiche has been bought. In both, Mr. Cummings Brown is killed and the cleaner finds him in the morning. In the book, when the police question Agatha, she makes a quiche first, which fails spectacularly, then confesses to buying the quiche, whereas in the film it's pretty obvious straight away, because I think she mentions like bread at one point, and you know, she knows, it's obvious that she doesn't know what she's doing, so she confesses to buying it straight away. So in both, the village find out about the cheating. Now, they find out about the cheating at the inquest in both, but in the book, Agatha isn't there and isn't invited, whereas in the film, she is there and is invited, and it's just horrific. Like, we don't want cheaters in the quiche competition. But in both, it's ruled an accident because, you know, Cow's Bane has somehow ended up in the spinach quiche. Accidents happen. They find out that it's Mr. Archimedes that supplied the quiche, and Mrs. Cummings Brown goes to sue him, but then changes her mind when she finds out the quiche actually came from Devon, because Cow's Bane grows in marshy areas. So in both as well, you've got Bill Wong, who is a detective in the police force, who becomes friends with Agatha. And Roy comes down for the weekend as well. And in both, Sheila, her next door neighbour, hates her and thinks she's a killer because she's had a thing going on with Mr. Cummings Brown. Honestly, who hasn't in this village? I'm just saying. Now, in the film, Sheila has a brother called James who comes to visit and makes an impression on Agatha. He's a handsome gentleman. And he's major, nonetheless. Now, in the book, when she first encounters Mrs. Cartwright, who is the winner of the quiche competition, Mrs. Cartwright is friendly and invites Agatha over to call on her to find out more information. However, in the film, she's downright rude and accuses Agatha of murder of her bit on the side. Now, in both, Roy, a friend from London, Agatha and Steve, spot a woman shooting evil eyes at Agatha. Now, it's on film in the, it's on film in the book, but it's in a picture on the in the film. I know I had to get that the right way around. So, you know, they see someone shooting evil eyes at Agatha, and they're trying to figure out who that is. Now, in both, she's making friends with Sarah, who is the vicar's wife, and is invited to the ladies' meeting. And in both, when she goes to the ladies' meeting, she ends up being invited to help to take the Buggles out on a trip. Now, in both, she also ends up giving money to Mrs. Cartwright for some information to help Mrs. Cartwright with the bingo money. And she finds out the Cummings Browns hated each other and Reg was a bit of a dog. So now she's kind of finding that out in the book. Whereas in the film, I mean, she probably was finding it out about there in the film, but we knew this for a while. So she takes she's been volunteered for the Boggles, and in both, Mr. Cartwright is very rudely warns her off. Now, in both, Agatha takes the Boggles out. Now, in the book, they end up in Bath, and Agatha learns about the randy nature of Mr. Cummins Brown, whereas in the film, her and Gemma are heading out with them when the Boggles give a list of people, basically, that Mr. Cummins Brown was trying to sleep with, as it were, or sleeping with. And then they even identify the person in the photo. So in the book, Agatha ends up following Mrs. Cartwright and meeting another dalliance of Mr. Cummings Brown, who tries to strangle her, then follows her home and throws dog do at the window. Now in the film, Agatha, Gemma and the Boggles go to Miss Burrows' house, a rich old spinster, to confront her about the evil eyes in the photo. And she puts a curse on Agatha, as she was going to marry Mr. Cummings Brown. Now, in the book, Bill tells Agatha the identity of the woman in the photo. Now, in the book, before she solved the murder, she's starting to be accepted by those around her. Not everyone, though, because some people still think she's a horrible human being. And she even throws an auction for some money and raises £25,000 for charity. Now, back then, that would have been a lot of... I mean, it's a lot of money now, but back then it was loads. In the film, she's almost given up and has tried to go back to London, but she becomes convinced that Mrs. Cummins Brown has murdered her husband. Now, in the book, Agatha and Roy go out to see Miss Burrows and about the murder, despite Agatha starting to stop snooping, who then tells her she's cursed and that they were going to get married and all of that. But due to this in both, we learn Mr. Cummins Brown was going to divorce Mrs. Cummins Brown and marry Miss Burrows, which means he wouldn't need her money anymore. So not only was he cheating on Mrs. Cummins Brown, but he was then going to leave her to get someone with a bit more dough. Now in both, John Cartwright tries to harm Agatha. Turns out he's been robbing places and thought Agatha was onto him. Now in the book, Sheila puts her house for sale and blames Agatha. However, it's because she has a bigger house to move to, basically. But in both, she tries to convince... So in both, Agatha tries to then convince Roy to go into business with her and fails. She also learns her quiche was made in Devon. So she's kind of finding that out now. So in the book, Sheila moves her house and moves out. And the new neighbour is James Lacey. And Roy now has a girlfriend, which because he needs to marry because he's an executive with the company. Now, in the film, Agatha has gone to the community hall and realised Mrs. Cummins Brown had used it to bake a pie, and she knows what cowbane was. Now, in both, as well, Bill Wong has given Agatha a kitten. In the film, it's a lot earlier on, but in the book, it's a little bit later. Now, in both, she finally has all the information and decides to record a confession from Mrs. Cummins Brown. And in both, she confronts Mrs. Cummins Brown, who admits what she did, but has also poisoned the tea that Agatha has drunk with sleeping pills and sets the house on fire, trying to kill Agatha within. In both, Bill saves Agatha and arrests Mrs. Cummins Brown. And in the book, Bill is the one to wait in her hospital, and she returns home on a minibus filled with old people to a huge village welcome. In the film, it's Roy in the hospital room, and she returns home in a taxi surrounded by people from the village. In the book, Roy is after the publicity that Agatha has gained, and James's sister is a Mrs. Camberwell who comes on the scene. But in both, they end with Agatha deciding to stay and settling down in the village for hopefully a quiet life. But as we know by the 32 books, probably not. So the plot lines are quite similar, but we have to take into account that the book was written 30 years ago. So the TV series did bring it sort of into the 21st century. However, some of the characters have been drastically changed, like the cleaner, Roy, Sheila, who isn't related to James in any way, James having a sister, Mrs. Camberwell, as well as Agatha in the book as well, going back to London a lot more than she did in the film. They kept the killer and the clues the same, and overall it did keep the essence of the book, so I think it gets a 6 out of 10 from me. Now, remember, if you agree or disagree with anything that I'm saying, please leave it below in the comments. And remember to subscribe to the channel so you're alerted when a new video comes out. But thank you so much, and remember to always keep it contento.